Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. At AM 630. WMAL.
637 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. Brian Wilson is in the chair here. We're joined in Mr. Neiman's absence by Sherry Jacobus. He will be back later this week, still on paternity leave, taking care of little Charlie. We have on the line right now Marc Thiessen, Washington Post columnist, former speechwriter for President George W. Bush, also wrote speeches for Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. And he is a guy who has sort of brought something to our attention that I think needs to be discussed a great deal more, Ms. Jacobus. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing great. How are you?
All right, so you went out there and found out that the President of the United States wasn't attending his daily intelligence briefings on a regular basis. So lay out what it is you found out and how you found out about it.
Well, when President Bush was in office, there's something called the Presidential Daily Brief, which is the daily meeting that the President holds with his senior intelligence advisors, with the Vice President, the Chief of Staff, Director of National Intelligence, National Security Advisor, to go over the most pressing threats and intelligence information that's collected overnight that the President needs to see. And President Bush had this meeting 6 days a week without fail. And so after President Obama came into office, some of the people in the intelligence community started buzzing that he wasn't having the meeting on a daily basis. And this was mentioned to me recently. And so I went back and I looked at the record. And you can see, because the President's the daily brief is always put on the President's public schedule, and we looked and did an analysis. And what we found was, working with a group called the Government Affairs Institute, we found that the President had skipped more than half of his daily intelligence meetings since coming into office. And in fact, in the last 2 years of his administration, his attendance had dropped to 38%.
Wow.
He reads it every day. Is what the Obama White House says, but he doesn't have the meeting.
All right, so now what about that? Because, if you're reading the intelligence, then do you really need the briefing? Is that a fair question?
Well, if your kid was was caught skipping class more than half the time, and he said, "Yeah, Dad, but I'm doing my reading," you probably wouldn't take that as an excuse. The reality is that there's a big difference between sitting down and reading a briefing document and spending over an hour, or at least up to an hour on a daily basis, sitting down with senior intelligence advisors discussing that, what it means, probing the assumptions, asking questions, requesting more information. And this became a very important process in the Bush administration. President Bush, in addition to having that daily meeting, things would come up in the daily brief, and he had over 100 what were called deep dives, where he brought senior intelligence advisors into the Oval Office. Not senior intelligence, the analysts from the CIA to come up, people who follow this stuff on a daily basis, people who normally don't even get into the Oval Office, and sometimes with differing views to debate in front of him and discuss it in depth.
Well, Mark, you bring up a really good point. You bring up a really good point about the fact that there's a difference between these two presidents. One thinks they can just read it by themselves and no problem, guys, I got this, and another one who sees the benefit in having the discussion with his top security advisors. So, I think this is something the American people should know more about. But also, I have a question for you. He only in the past 2 years he's missed a lot of these, and this is a president who's missed a lot of votes when he was in the Senate. He's not known for really showing up for a lot of things. Here's my question. They're saying that he read these on his iPad. Is that correct?
That's what they say.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, isn't this the same guy who a week or so ago we were told was having problems with his iPhone? I think this is a serious question. If he's technologically challenged, as am I, many people are, can we rely on this? And shouldn't there be some kind of checks and balances in place so that we know that the president is doing his job rather than him just telling us that he read this? And that might sound like something we would just assume, but in this case it seems that we do need some sort of verification that he's doing just the basic daily chores that a president should do.
Yeah, the message Barack Obama needs to hear is like, no, Mr. President, there isn't an app for that. You have to meet with your intelligence advisors on a regular basis. You have to have an in-person discussion on this.
Particularly 6 days the 6 days leading up to the anniversary of 9/11. That's what I find so astonishing.
He did not attend his daily briefing for the 5 or 6 days leading up to the anniversary of September 11th. Is that correct?
That is correct. 5 or 6 days leading up. I broke this story last Monday, in the Washington Post. And on Tuesday, we were attacked in Egypt and Libya. And so I went back for my next column and looked at the public schedule, and it turned out that the president had not had a briefing, and it had attended his daily intelligence briefing from September 5th, a week earlier. And in fact, the day after the attacks on our embassy in Libya that killed an ambassador and 3 other U.S. officials, he didn't have it either. He had it scheduled, but then he canceled it. And instead of rescheduling it for later in the day, he attended a campaign rally in Las Vegas. So he had time for a campaign rally in Las Vegas, didn't have time for his intelligence.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. I remember I did look at those dates as well, and I've been reading your columns, and I noted that was the day where he was picked up, with the guy mugging for the cameras and whatnot. It seems that we should have, we know now that there was advance warning given. There should have been a different way he could have been spending his time.
Are you surprised that the other mainstream media have not made a bigger deal of it? Can you imagine if it was said of President George W. Bush that he wasn't attending the vast majority of his national security intelligence briefings? What the outcry would have been?
Absolutely. Look, but this is in keeping with what we know about President Obama. I mean, remember back in the 2008 campaign when he was famously quoted as saying, "I'm a better speechwriter than my speechwriters. I'm a better policy director than my policy directors. I'm a better political director than my political directors." Well, it turns out he thinks he's a better intelligence briefer than his intelligence briefer.
Well, he also did this. Yeah, and I believe that he also was missing some daily economic briefings and was no longer meeting with his top economic staff sometime in the past year when the economy was just at its worst. And instead, he was getting his economic briefings from Joe Biden, the same guy who didn't realize that 2 of the car companies that we bailed out actually did file for bankruptcy. He said just the opposite.
No, hasn't met with his jobs council in 6 months. Hadn't met with his intelligence briefers in a week leading up to the attack that killed an ambassador. This is the president who has no time.
All right.
He doesn't need anybody else.
We've got to leave it right there, Mark, but thank you for the reporting on this and bringing it to our attention, and thank you for being here on WMAL. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
It is 6:45 on 105.9 FM and AM 630 WMAL.